Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's true crime video. I'm so happy we could meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this that we're all forced to deal with on the day-to-day, somehow today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the horrible murders of 13-year-old Stoni Blair and 9-year-old Stephen Barry. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically, you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us, one of us, one of us. And you can also follow me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. They're all Bratterstein, but no pressure. So now that I'm done begging you to join my cult, we can get into this video. Now, this is a video that was suggested to me by a subscriber named Christy. Hi, Christy. Thank you, Christy, for the nightmares. Christy sent me over a video on Instagram. We were talking on Instagram, and she sent me over a video. And the video was of Michelle's confession. And I watched it. I watched the whole thing. It was 2 hours long. And I was compelled to look further. First off, I was pissed. I was so pissed. I do not like this woman. I'm going to say it right off the bat. I do not like her. You're not going to like her. I'm sure you're not going to like her. I'd be very surprised if anyone likes her, is my point. And when I watched the confession, I felt like if I didn't learn everything about this case, I was going to go crazy. So I did. I deep dove and I learned every single thing that I could find about this case. And once I did, once I learned more about this woman, once I learned more about the things she did, once I learned more about the people who knew or had an idea of what was going on and did nothing, I became enraged. And now, as Better Off Red says, I'm here to tell you a terrible story to ruin your day. So with that said, I'm going to tell you the entire story. I did all the research so you don't have to. And at the end of this video, I want you to answer a question of the day, but I want you to wait till the end so you can hear everything that I say and then answer a question of the day. And that is this. Do you believe Michelle's reason, the justification that she gave for murdering her 2 children? Do you believe that what she says happened is true, or do you believe that she is full of shit? Let me know down below at the end of this video. So now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of Mitchelle Blair, a monster mother and her house of horrors. And I want to start this video off, as I sometimes do, with a quote. I'm actually going to start it off with 2 quotes. The first one is going to be from the judge who eventually ended up sentencing Michelle. She said of Michelle's heinous crimes, and I'm warning you now, this one's really messed up, so just know that going into it. But she said of Michelle's crimes, and I quote, "One thing that strikes me as the greatest tragedy here is that they will never know what a life is like without experiencing fearing their mother. They will never know the joy of what could have been in their life without having you in it. They lived in terrible fear of you, and I find that just so sad in this case. After all is said and done, you impose the death penalty on your own children." And now a quote from the woman herself, from Mitchelle Blair. And this is Michelle referencing her 13-year-old daughter, Stoni. Okay? She said of her 13-year-old child, and I quote, "I definitely meant to kill her. If I had a chance to do it again, I would." On March 24th, 2015, on the east side of Detroit, townhouse number 804 at the Martin Luther King Apartments was served with an eviction notice. The renter, who had been living in the low-income townhouse for at least 10 years, had been really struggling on paying rent. She couldn't seem to hold down a job, and she had tried to get help from family members, but they had kind of gotten to the point where they were like, "We need to stop enabling you," and told her, like, "No, I can't help you financially anymore. You need to get a job. You need to go back to school. You need to get it together, guy." But she didn't. And at this point, she was behind over $2,000 in her rent. She had dropped out of high school in the 10th grade when she got pregnant with her first child, a daughter, and because of her limited education, she found that jobs were a little bit harder to come by. She had worked in a bar for a short period of time, but that didn't really work, so she ended up just being a stay-at-home mom, which is a hard job in itself, don't get me wrong, but she didn't have really any income coming in except for $700 a month that she was getting in governmental assistance for her 4 children. So when representatives came over to her apartment to perform the eviction and they knocked on the door, she didn't answer. Michelle and none of her children were home at that time, so they let themselves in because that's how evictions work. You go in and you just move the people out. Like, I don't know how eviction processes work in other states, but in California, you get a lot of notice before this happens, but either way, they go in and they find a completely trashed apartment. Apparently there was garbage, food, stuff everywhere. It was described as unlivable. So they were inside the apartment and they started moving stuff around, and this is when they came upon a deep freeze. You know, the type that is like a big square and it opens from the top and it's like really deep. A deep freeze? Okay, so they find this, and normally that wouldn't be strange, but they found it in the living room, and that is a bit odd. But it wasn't as odd as things were going to get. Odd really isn't the right word. The right word is fucked, honestly. It was about 11:30 in the morning. Like it wasn't even noon yet when this is happening, and they go to move this deep freeze. And when they go to move it, they realize like this is way too heavy for us to actually lift and move it. So they decide they're going to open it and empty out what's inside so that they can then move it all out in pieces. And that's when they made the most horrible discovery that I think anybody could ever make. They open the freezer, and inside they find the body of a young teenage girl. She had a piece of black fabric wrapped around her neck, and she was completely like frozen, like to the freezer. She'd clearly been in there a while. And she was so unrecognizable that they actually thought they were looking at the body of like a 45 or 50-year-old woman and not a child, which it did turn out to be a child. So naturally police were called, and when police came and they started processing the scene, they started looking around, they made another just horrible discovery, as if what I'm telling you right now hasn't been horrible enough. As they're trying to like look inside the freezer further, kind of move the girl, which they had a lot of trouble with, but as they're looking in the freezer further, they find that she's not alone in there. They find that below her, she's on top of another body, and the body below her is that of a young boy wrapped in a blanket. Now, while this is happening, one of the neighbors had, taken notice to what's going on, because nosy neighbors. And they let police know that the occupant of the home, a 35-year-old mother of 4 named Mitchelle Blair, is actually just like right next door at a neighbor's house. I believe this neighbor was one of Michelle's relatives. And it's reported that at the time that this happened, Mitchelle was babysitting someone else's kids, which is just like, I can't even imagine. But when police go, they do find that Mitchelle is there, and she's there with 2 of her children, but there are 2 of her children missing. This is 9-year-old Stephen and 13-year-old Stony that are not with Mitchelle. So police go to Mitchelle and they start talking to her, and initially they're just talking to her as like a person of interest, but it didn't take long of them questioning her for them to realize like, damn, shit's really fucked up here. So they, take her downtown, as they say. And as police are leading her away, she just simply says to one of her neighbors, "I'm sorry." Later that day, many neighbors gathered in like a common area, grassy space to speak about their frustrations with the tragedy, because even though the kids hadn't been identified yet, it is still fucking kids found in a freezer. That's an upsetting thing. And one of the women who was there, a woman in her 50s named Yvette, said of this tragedy, and I quote, "We lost 2 of our beautiful children down here in the Martin Luther King apartments because we don't want to pay attention or be nosy. This is a message I have for other communities. Be nosy, pay attention, they're children." To which I say, yes. So naturally, police believe that the bodies in the freezer are that of Michelle's 2 unaccounted for children, because honestly, who else could it be? What are the odds that it's any other kids, right? But they have to confirm this. So they take the kids to the morgue. Well, not even just the kids. They take the entire freezer, the entire deep freeze, to the morgue, because the kids are frozen to the freezer. So they have to wait for them to like thaw a bit so that they can take them out. And they do that, and it takes 3 whole days for the bodies to be thawed out enough for autopsies to be performed. 3 days before their identities could be confirmed. But once the autopsies were conducted, it was determined and the kids were positively identified as 9-year-old Stephen Gage Berry and 13-year-old Stoni Ann Blair. And though the exact time of death could not be determined, it appeared that the 2 had been in the freezer at least a couple of years. And the county medical examiner said that the children had died from, quote, multiple blunt force trauma, but that Stephen also had thermal injuries listed as a cause of death. And I can only imagine that that might mean that he was still alive when he was put in the freezer, which is just like too much to think about. But actually, now that I'm thinking about his injuries, which we are going to get into, that could have been from something else as well. But again, we're going to get into that a little bit later. A neighbor named Tori said of the murders and of the children, and I quote, "This is so tragic. They were the nicest kids, so respectable." And another kid, a neighbor who was 10 years old, I believe, and his name was Eli, he was friends with Stephen. And when he learned what had happened to his friend, another actual child, he was shocked. Like, how could he not be? How could a 10-year-old not be shocked to learn that one of their friends had been killed, right? He says that he was told that Stephen had gone to Georgia to like live with family, and that Stephen's mother, Mitchelle, was such a nice lady and gave him a hug every day. Others said that Mitchelle was a fine woman, a kind woman. One woman calling her a beautiful spirit. She gave the impression that Mitchelle was just trying to be a good person and get by with her kids. And Michelle's brother Marlon, who lived in California at the time of the murders, at the time that he gave this quote, he said he was still just processing the news, and he said specifically, and I quote, "It's too early to even say what this could be or make any judgments. She didn't have any emotional problems from what I'm aware of. I don't know what to say about all this." She didn't have any emotional problems that he's aware of. Let's remember that going forward. So now when Mitchelle was taken downtown and she was questioned, interrogated, the entire thing was recorded, and that's the video that I watched on YouTube that Christy sent me. And what she says and the way she says it is just so crazy. Considering what she's there talking about, you would think that she cared more, but she really only seemed to be concerned about talking to her aunt and getting a message to her aunt to let her aunt know that she still loved her and that she wasn't mad at her. And I just found that to be a really odd point, because she seemed to care about that more than anything else she was discussing. She was asked by the investigator how many kids she has, and she said 2, that she used to have 4. And that note really stuck with me because it just seemed so incredibly heartless. And then she just started casually confessing. She had no problem saying everything that she did. And she started with telling the investigator what happened to 9-year-old Stephen, because apparently he was killed first. So this is the point where I want to let you know that things are going to take a hard, sharp turn into really fucked up territory. This is a really, really rough case, so just know that going into it. So, Mitchelle tells the investigator that in August of 2012, and keep in mind, the kids weren't found until 2015, okay? So in August of 2012, she came home to find her youngest child, who was 8 years old at the time that she was arrested, so he must have been like 5 or 6 in 2012. She says that she came home to find him simulating sexual activities with his dolls. So immediately when she sees her young son doing this, she freaks out, as anybody would. And she's like, who did this? Why are you doing that? Why are you doing that with your dolls? Who showed you this? Has anyone ever done this to you? And she says that her young son responded with, yes, my brother Stephen has. Now, Mitchelle says that the first thing that she does in this scenario, well, she says 2 different things. First, she says she immediately confronts Stephen, but then when she's in court, she says that she actually called police right away once she was told this by her youngest son. And that she called the police and asked, like, what would happen in the scenario where one brother was raping his little brother? Like, what would happen when they take both kids out of the house? What would be the situation? And she says that police told her that, yes, both boys would likely be taken out of the house, and that they asked her, like, is this happening in your home? And she said, no, she was calling for a friend. Which, that's a whole nother thing. Like, the police should have definitely, if this call happened, the police definitely should have done something at that point, that time, right then and there. But apparently she says that police just told her to call CPS to get more information, but that yes, an investigation would have to be done into the household, and during the investigation, both boys would be taken out of the house. She says at this point she goes to confront him, and he denies it. So at that point, she just started beating him, that she punched him over and over and over, that she tortured him, right? She tortured him until finally he admitted to it. He admitted to hurting his brother. He admitted to the sexual assault, and that he admitted that in the night he would get up and instead of going to the bathroom, he would pee on his little brother instead. And from there, she was filled with rage, and she tortured this 9-year-old for 1 or 2 weeks, beating him, punching him, kicking him, making him drink Windex, putting him in the shower with water so hot that it broke the skin on his feet and the lower half of his body. And she said specifically of this, and I quote, his skin came off. Over the 2 weeks that she did this, she says that she stayed pretty drunk on vodka while she would assault him. She even went as far as to cutting off his air supply on 2 different occasions, once by putting a bag over his head until he passed out, and once by strangling him by lifting him off the ground with a belt until he passed out. And she, while confessing, she told the investigator that she didn't feel bad recounting this. Like, it didn't make her feel bad when she was retelling the story, but that she knew that doing it was evil and knew that she was evil. She tells the investigator that finally, after a period of 2 weeks or so, his body could no longer take the abuse, and that he had like labored breathing that sounded like wheezing or panting, and that he needed to throw up, he needed to go to the bathroom, but he couldn't physically do it. And she said that she tried to perform CPR on him, but it didn't work. And she was particularly triggered in this memory because she said that she could smell like beef stew on his breath that she had given him the night before. She says that he had asked her for pizza and that she had told him no. And that note just stuck out to me because she couldn't even like give this kid like a last meal of sorts, you know? It's just... Stephen died as a result of his numerous injuries on August 30th, 2012. After he died, she sat on the ground against the wall and just stared at him. His mother then went and wrapped him in his favorite Paul Frank monkey blanket and placed his body in the deep freeze in her living room. She claims that she didn't mean to kill Stephen, that she did mean to hurt him, that she meant to severely hurt him as a punishment for what she says he had done, but that his death was ultimately an accident. And she said specifically of this, and I quote, "If I had killed Stephen intentionally, I would definitely be proud to say I did, but I didn't." Proud. This woman is disgusting. Michelle says that after Stephen was killed, she did plan to turn herself in. She said she even called her Aunt Angela, who was a Detroit police child abuse investigator, might I add, but that when she called her, she just couldn't do it. She just couldn't admit it. Didn't stop her from collecting the money that she got like from the government for her deceased child now, but that's neither here nor there. But she says that when she called her aunt, she just said to her instead, like, if anything was to happen, would you take care of the kids for me? And her aunt was like, bro, you gotta get it together. You always lean on me. From here, 9 months went by. 9 months went by with Stephen's body in the freezer in the living room. And that's just so crazy to me, especially because, like, yes, she had her youngest son, but Stoni was 13. And her other daughter was even older than Stoni. So these older kids are living in this house with their brother's body in the freezer. And we find out later that, yes, they knew he was there. So it's just absolutely crazy to consider. But now we move on to Stoni. Speaking of Stoni, she was the next to be killed. And Michelle says that 9 months after finding out that Stephen had been abusing her youngest son, she then learned that Stoni had also been abusing her youngest son. She says that her youngest told her that Stoni had been abusing him and had been abusing Stephen when Stephen was alive. And she says at this point that she had lost it, that she couldn't believe that her older daughter could have done what she had done, that she could sit there and watch her abuse Stephen to the point that he died and not say anything, not admit to what she had done, and then to have gone on to continue abusing her youngest son, even in the wake of learning what her mother was capable of. And she says at this point, she just completely lost it on Stoni, and that Stephen's death was an accident, but that Stoni's death was on purpose. Michelle says that she goes and she confronts Stoni, and that she does admit it eventually, but that's after she's been tortured by her mother, that she admits that yes, she had sexually abused both boys and she did it because she hated them. And when Michelle asked, like, why would Stephen not tell me this while I'm torturing him for weeks on end? Why would he not tell me what you had done? And she said that in the periods of time that she said that Stoni said, that in the periods of time where Michelle would like take a break from abusing Stephen, Stoni would then go in and abuse Stephen and say that she would kill him if he was to tell their mom what Stoni had been doing. And she says that Stoni admitted that she would sexually abuse Stephen, and then the two of them at the same time would then go and abuse her youngest son. And from there, from that realization, Michelle went on to torture Stoni, prolonged torture. She would beat her. She would choke her with a t-shirt. She would starve her. She would suffocate her with a plastic bag and throw scalding water on her. She would beat her over the head with a thick wooden stick, saying that she made, quote, little lumps everywhere, but that Stoni was still alive. And she says that each day she says she learned more and more information from her youngest son, and as she did, she would drink more alcohol and she would beat Stoni worse and worse. She says that her youngest would give her more and more details over the days of what Stoni did, how Stoni raped him, and that, this is so gross. She says that her youngest even said that Stoni would take out her menstrual pad and like squeeze the blood into his mouth, which that's just fucking extreme. Like all of this is this case is so hard and it's so just gross. You know, it's a lot. I know it's a lot. I'm aware of how much this is. I almost didn't even cover it, but I feel like it needs to be. I've never heard anyone talk about this, and I feel like it's crazy because it's such an intense case. And she says that she continued to abuse and torture Stoni until eventually her body too gave out. And this was, well, her body didn't give out. She was killed on May 25th, 2013. Mitchelle says that on this day, Stoni had been sleeping on the floor when she woke up to her mother standing directly above her with the two of them face to face. And Mitchelle says that she then asked Stoni, like, are you ready to apologize to your brother? And she says that Stoni apologized for abusing someone in that way in general, but didn't specifically apologize for abusing her brother. And this did not please Mitchelle. She's like, oh, you're sorry for doing this to someone, but not sorry for doing this to your brother specifically. She says that she started punching Stoni, and that this time, for the first time ever, Stoni actually punched her back and apparently immediately regretted it and apologized and said that it was a reflex and she didn't mean to do it. And what's really fucked up here, like super, like it just, this note just bothered me, is she says that Stoni always had trouble standing up for herself in general, like as a 13-year-old in life, she had trouble asserting herself, and that when Stoni hit her back, she was strangely proud of her. And that note just really upset me. And she says from there, I can only imagine a woman this abusive, your kid hits you back, how pissed she would be. She says that she grabbed a t-shirt, the black shirt that was found around Stoni's neck when she was found in the freezer, and she tied it around her neck to strangle her, and then put a bag over her face and smothered her to death. The medical examiner later said of Stoni's injuries, and I quote, she had multiple blows to the head. The entire scalp was suffused with hemorrhage, which meant that she had received numerous impacts over the head. She had every body surface covered with something. Wherever you looked, there was either a scar or an ulceration. When Mitchelle tortured her kids, it wasn't just physical abuse, it was also psychological torture. She would go from periods of time where she would relentlessly beat them, starve them, maybe feeding them once a day, to being calm, talking to them, feeding them. They never knew what version of their mother they were going to get that day because she yo-yoed so hard from aggressively abusing them to acting like a normal person. A normal person doesn't do what she did. And I can't even imagine how terrifying this was for those kids. After Stoni was killed, her body was then placed in the freezer on top of Stephen's, but it wasn't Mitchelle who put Stoni in the freezer. Mitchelle made her eldest daughter do it. And that note just destroys me. I can't even imagine what it was like to be these kids in this house, dude. She sounds, I hate this woman. But she was later interviewed. Mitchelle was interviewed and she was asked, like, why did you put Stoni on top of Stephen like that? Like, how could you do something like that? And she responded, quote, I only had one deep freezer. Where was she gonna go? She's just so evil. It's so fucked up, dude. On top of making her eldest child put her dead sibling on top of her other dead sibling, she then made her youngest and her eldest look in the freezer at their dead brother and sister. And then kept the freezer in the living room, in like the main part of the house, as a constant reminder to those kids of what she had done, what she was capable of, and what she could then go on to do to them. And apparently when she showed them their bodies, the two just cried. Michelle's Aunt Angela, the aunt that Mitchelle was so concerned with speaking with during her interrogation, a woman that we're going to talk more about at length a little bit later because I do have some thoughts, she said of Michelle's surviving children, and I quote, pray for those children. They saw things that nobody should ever have to see. I have no idea what it was like for them to live with those bodies all that time. I can't even imagine. Now, Mitchelle says that when she showed her children the bodies of their dead siblings, that her youngest son, the one who she says was being abused the whole time, had said that he didn't cry, that he said that she had saved him. Now, this is what she says that he said, but I do not believe it's true because later there's a hearing where Michelle's actually trying to retain guardianship of her two surviving children. Why? Who the fuck knows? We'll get more into that again later. But during this hearing, her youngest contradicts the statement that his mother saved him. And he instead talks at length about how he was also aggressively physically abused by his mother okay, Mitchelle, and that he thinks she deserves to go to jail, and that he saw her murder his siblings. This woman is just plain evil. She murdered 2 of her children, dude, and then psychologically tortured her surviving kids by letting them see their dead siblings' bodies and then keeping them in the freezer as a constant reminder of what she was capable of. And these are the kids that she, quote, loved enough to get their names tattooed on her arm. The kids who now, 2 of them, she doesn't even claim anymore. She says that Stephen and Stony are no longer her kids. And she said specifically of Stephen and Stony, and I quote, "I have 2 children. That's it. Stephen and Stony are demons. Period." The Friday after the 2 children's bodies were found, a candlelight vigil was held in their honor, and many people, including friends, family members, and even governmental officials, came and stood outside the townhouse where the kids had lived and died. The porch was covered in candles and stuffed animals and balloons, and at one point during the vigil, the people who were there released balloons into the sky, yelling that they loved Stony and that they loved Stephen into the air. People present saw this crime as a sign that they needed to solidify their community because it, takes a village, and that this was a sign that they just needed to start paying attention, getting to know each other's neighbors, and to just really start focusing, because how did people go this long without even noticing that these kids were gone? But this happens a lot, right? Like, this wasn't even the first murder that happened in these apartment complex, like the apartment complex that Mitchelle lived in. Just a couple of years before, in 2012, another woman, a woman named Samaria Green, I believe is what her name was, she stabbed her daughter to death. I believe her daughter was only 8 years old, and she stabbed her to death in these apartments as well. And on top of that, in an interview with Mitchelle's Aunt Angela, she even said that she wasn't sure if Mitchelle was given a psychological evaluation after the initial reports of abuse had come out, because we're going to get into it in a little bit, but there were reports of abuse from, like, Mitchelle abusing her kids in the early 2000s. And Mitchelle's aunt said specifically that, quote, "they don't always do those when there are signs of abuse," the psychological evaluations, and that if they did, half the people in Detroit would be having evaluations. This woman saying that half of Detroit would be evaluated if people had to be evaluated if there were signs of child abuse. And that's just so scary. And she worked as a police officer, like in the police department, investigating child abuse. So she knows what she's talking about, at least to a point. So there was no village for these kids, these 2 kids that were murdered and then kept in a freezer for years. Nobody reported them missing. Nobody said or did anything. Nobody even noticed. Mitchelle even went into the kids' school and pulled them out of school. Not even just the 2 not even just Stony and Stephen. She pulled all 4 of her kids out of school, telling the school that she was moving, but telling other people that she was homeschooling them, even though she herself had dropped out of school in the 10th grade and really didn't have the education to homeschool her kids, right? And there was no follow-up on this. There is no requirement for parents to notify the school district that they're homeschooling, even though it is, quote, encouraged. The only time any sort of like registration was required is if a parent's requesting special education assistance. There was nothing at all in effect statewide that alerts anyone in any sort of position in power if kids are removed from the school system, which is crazy to me, because I remember growing up thinking that, like, my mom was going to go to jail if I ditched. You know what I mean? Like the truancy thing. I thought that was such a thing, but maybe it's state by state. I don't know. It's just, that blows my mind a little bit. Like, you could just pull them out and everyone's like, well, deuces, kids, like, good luck. And apparently anytime anyone would ask Mitchelle, like, where's Stony? Where's Stephen? She would say they weren't home. They were at their friend's house. They were at an aunt's house. Anywhere but here. Anywhere but the freezer. But even though, like, Mitchelle tried to hide what she did, right? She tried to hide it from people. She lied about where the kids were. She didn't really make any attempt to try to conceal what she did when she knew she was getting evicted. You know what I mean? Like, maybe she couldn't physically move the freezer herself. Maybe she probably couldn't afford to hire somebody to move it, but she didn't really do anything to try to conceal the fact that there were bodies in the freezer. You know what I mean? And it's just wild to me, because I don't know how evictions work in Detroit, but in California, it takes 3 to 4 months for an eviction to go through. And when the eviction's going through, you get like a last notice from the sheriff, like days, at least 5 days before the eviction's going to take place. So like put a notice on your door, like, hey, last chance, you better get out or we're going to remove you. And Mitchelle clearly knew that the eviction was coming, because the day of it, she told one of her neighbors, like, oh, well, they're coming. There's dumpsters out front. Like, shit's about to go down. And she was talking to her neighbor. I believe her name was Miss Carrie. And she even said, like, she clearly knew that something was up. Maybe she wanted to get caught, because she told Miss Carrie specifically, and I quote, "Miss Carrie, if you don't ever see me again, just know that I love you." And this woman, Miss Carey, was clearly her friend and had been her friend a while, and said, like, okay, I'm at work now, but when I get off work, I'll come and help you with this whole eviction business. And they were friends. Like, Miss Carey said that she had even been in her house, like, the week before, and she said she had been there for a barbecue, and she noticed the deep freeze in the living room, because it's in the living room, and that's odd, but that she didn't think much of it, because, like, everyone has a deep freeze. She herself had a deep freeze. And it's just very eerie to now know that the kids had been in there all this time. So Mitchelle was arrested, and she was initially held on a $1 million bond, but this is when she was just being charged with child abuse and wasn't yet being charged with the murders. Mitchelle, who appeared at this hearing by video call, showed little emotion, and she actually tried leaving the hearing early and had to be called back to finish. She was also ordered that she wasn't allowed to have any contact with neighbors at the apartment complex where she lived or with any of her surviving children. Initially, Mitchelle was charged with 4 counts of first-degree child abuse and 1 count of committing first-degree child abuse in the presence of a minor. And the court ended up entering a plea of not guilty on her behalf, but eventually she did get many more charges tacked on with that, and in the end I think she had like 17 different charges against her. These charges included felony murder, first-degree premeditated murder, torture, and the first-degree child abuse charge, and at this point she was held without bond. So once Mitchelle was arrested and her 2 surviving children were out of her grasp, they were able to be interviewed, and they were interviewed by a company called Kids Talk, which is a child advocacy group that was like hired on by the county. And in speaking to the kids and being able to like actually get information from them, they were able to find out what really went on in that house with Mitchelle. Because Mitchelle would lead you to believe that she was a good mother, just trying her best, and that these instances of abuse with Stoni and Steven were outliers, that they were freak occurrences, but in talking to the kids, they found that this clearly wasn't the case. All of these kids were abused for years, dude. On the day that Steven and Stoni were found, the 2 surviving children were given medical examinations, and they were found to both be covered in scars. The 8-year-old boy, the youngest, had, quote, 25 scars and injuries, both old and new, on his back, as well as, quote, loop-shaped scars and injuries on his back and his buttocks that were consistent with being whipped with an extension cord. During Mitchelle's oldest daughter, her teenage daughter's examination, they noticed that there was a cut above her left eye, and they asked her how that happened, and she said her mother hit her in the face with a 2x4. And they noticed also that one of her front teeth were broken, and when they asked her how that had happened, she said that her mother had smacked her in the mouth with a curling iron. She also had scars from being burned with irons and whipped with cords, and she said that her mother refused to get her or any of her siblings medical attention, despite this woman having Medicaid for all 4 of her children. She had governmental insurance for all of her kids, but she wasn't getting them assistance because she was the one hurting them. Once Mitchelle was arrested and this started to come out, people were shocked. Mitchelle seemed to a lot of people to just be a good mother trying her best. Her brother, as I said, was shocked. Remember, he thought she didn't have any emotional problems. And one of Michelle's old neighbors, it was a friend who had moved out, but after he moved out of the complex, they stayed friends. They talked all the time. I think they talked like once a week. He said that Mitchelle loved her kids and that she was very overprotective of them and very like defensive of them. Like she was like mama bear type. And he said specifically of her and her kids, quote, "From what I knew, she loved them to damn pieces." That was clearly a very loose quote, but you get what I'm saying. And this neighbor said when he learned what had happened that he was blown away and in complete shock by it. And so was another neighbor named Jessica. Jessica said that Mitchelle loved her kids, that she homeschooled her kids, and that she was super proud of them, and she would even super glue her kids' assignments and drawings to the living room walls because she was so proud of how well they had done. This neighbor continued saying, quote, "I can't believe it. It's really scary living next to someone that you never really knew." She said that Mitchelle and her family were very normal looking looking from the outside in, that nobody had any idea. And she said something that just really icked me. And when you hear it, you'll get it. She said, and I quote, "I remember how many times I was in that house leaning on that freezer. I had never seen anything out of the ordinary." Other neighbors just seemed to think that Mitchelle was totally normal. They would let their kids have slumber parties at her house. But there are contradicting statements when it comes to how people perceived her, and that could be because she was a different person depending on who you talk to, because according to reports from, I believe it's Fox 2 and People.com, 99% sure it was those two publications, if you will, they said that Mitchelle had openly admitted to several of her neighbors that she had killed her kids, and that nobody said anything, nobody did anything, nobody reported anything. That's to say, at least recently, nobody did anything, nobody said anything, because there were reports of Mitchelle abusing her kids reported to CPS in 2002 and in 2005. And at that time, CPS did intervene. They came, they looked into the situation, and they substantiated the claims that Mitchelle was abusing her kids. And they even had her, you know, go into counseling and other services, but she retained custody of the kids. When asked about this, about Mitchelle, you know, being looked into for child abuse and how she got to keep her kids and all the things that she was supposed to do, the counseling and all of that, one of the representatives, Bob, his name was Bob, he said essentially that he couldn't really say much because of privacy laws, which, okay, sure, but that basically they didn't have any responsibility to follow up further with the family if Mitchelle completed her programs that she was supposed to. Now, is that to say that she did complete them and that's why they didn't look into it? Or is that to say that he wasn't really sure what he could and could not say at that point? It sounds a lot like passing the buck to me, but that could just be me. He was just essentially like, the cases are closed, and once the cases are closed, we can't do anything. And it just seems like nobody wanted to do anything. I don't know, it just makes me crazy. Like, even the children's great aunt Angela, the one who she wanted to talk to while she was being arrested, she even said that, first off, let me back up. After Mitchelle got arrested, just so you know, going into this, after Mitchelle got arrested, her 2 surviving children were sent initially to stay with Aunt Angela, okay? Aunt Angela said that she knew that abuse was going on in that house, but not to that level. I just do not understand why this was able to keep going on. It's so frustrating because, like Angela said that once she told Mitchelle, like, I have to back up. I'm getting so frustrated. She said that she used to really help Mitchelle and really help take care of the kids. Like, she had a lot of responsibility in that. She took on a lot of responsibility in that. But that once she told Mitchelle, like, you need to get it together, you need to get a job, you need to go back to school, you need to do something, that Mitchelle had cut her off, completely isolated herself from the kids, and just basically cut out all of the extended family. Like, totally. When Angela was asked why she didn't react to the signs of abuse, she said that that was a valid question that she would also ask herself. Now, I'm not usually a judgy fucking bitch, but okay, maybe I am. Well, I'm gonna be right now. What the fuck, Angela? If what I am reading is correct, first off, you worked as a police child abuse investigator, okay? And that you knew that in this home, child abuse was happening, but not to that level. And then Mitchelle, who's already abusing her kids, cuts off all communication with you. All. Doesn't talk to you, doesn't talk to any of the family, just falls off the planet, and you do nothing, you report nothing. That is your job. And these kids were your family. Inexcusable. And then this is the woman who the court decides that the 2 remaining children should go and stay with while they figure out the custody situation. I would like to know who made that call. Anyway, sorry, I got off on like a big thing there, and I know I must have jumbled over my words, and that might have been hard to even follow. I'm just very passionate. When I get passionate or upset, interested, passionate, upset, any of the above, A, B, or C, I start to talk a little bit fast. I start to get a little bit jabbery. I get comments a lot that I talk too fast. It's because I care. But I'm just so pissed off because all of these adults were not doing the best things that they could. They were not being the best versions of themselves. They weren't being as responsible as they should be. And as a result, there's 2 dead children in a freezer. And those stakes are just too high, and that's inexcusable. But I digress. Remember how I said that Mitchelle had a not guilty plea entered on her behalf? Well, she surprised everybody in court. It seems like she even surprised her own attorney when she decided to turn around and be like, you know what, actually, I've thought this over. I thought it real good. I've been thinking. And I'm not a coward. So I'm actually going to plead guilty, and I will please take the death penalty if it's on the table. In response, the Judge King, was like, well, I'm going to give you 1 more week to think about it because, like, these are serious charges. And Mitchelle responded, like, I'm certain in my decision. I don't need another week to think it over, but the judge was firm and didn't let her enter that guilty plea like right off the bat. The judge had gotten new information regarding Michelle's like psych evaluation and wanted to make sure to look it over before accepting the plea. And Michelle was pissed, saying that she had a big problem with it and thought it was ridiculous, but the judge wanted to ensure that Michelle's rights were protected first in case she did have like some sort of mental incapacity. Like, you're not going to let somebody who can't mentally make decisions make such a serious decision. In the end, Michelle's guilty plea was accepted and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Despite her attorney, I believe, like really trying to convince her not to enter this plea, because in every article I read, it says that he discussed the plea with her at least 3 times. Like, he's like, listen, I tried. I don't want her coming back later and trying to appeal and saying that like I didn't do my job, because I did my job. The bitch wanted to go to jail. And I say the bitch with all disrespect. I did think it was worth mentioning because it really irked me that her attorney did also say that these murders, the torture murders of her children, were an unfortunate situation and that Michelle had been in a difficult situation. And I don't know, that just really like bothered me, because what the fuck? If that's like putting it as lightly as humanly possible. And when I read it, I could not move past it. And so I thought that you should dwell in this anger with me. The judge said to Michelle of her crimes, and I quote, "As a mother, one of your primary responsibilities was to protect your children. And in that respect, you failed in the worst possible way." Michelle did end up losing custody of her 2 surviving children, not custody, but her parental rights. For some reason, she was fighting for this. She thought that people were going to be like, yeah, listen, I know you killed 2 of your kids, but like the other 2, sure, make decisions. Like, no, obviously, bitch, you're not going to get to keep custody of your children. So the court was trying to take away her parental rights and also the parental rights of the 2's biological fathers. They had 2 separate fathers. The son would have been 8 around this time, and the daughter would have been 17. So the boy would have been put up for adoption, and I guess the teenage girl would have kind of been on her own, which is really sad, but like, she's about to be an adult, so what else can you do, you know? And during the meantime, the kids were staying with their Aunt Angela, as I said, and the fathers were allowed to have supervised visits while CPS was there, while they were in the process of having custody, and their parental rights basically dissolved. So the 2 surviving kids had different fathers. The young boy who survives' father was 31, and his name was Stephen, and I believe he was also young Stephen's father. And the teenage girl's father was 35, and his name was Alexander, and apparently he was also Stoney's father. So Papa Stephen was the young surviving boy's dad, and Stephen, who was murdered's dad, and Papa Alexander was the teenage daughter who survives' dad and Stoney's dad. And listen, the 2 surviving kids, I have seen their names in reportings, but in a lot of reportings, they're kept anonymous, likely for good reason, so I'm respectfully not saying their names. So I'm sorry if it gets a little confusing, but like, they're kids, and that's the decision I've made here. Now, Michelle clearly did not like her children's fathers, because when she was brought in the courtroom, she flipped both of them off, and it's probably because of a couple of reasons. I mean, it's very, you know, every relationship is kind of, there's a lot to it, but 1, they owed her like a lot of child support, and 2, neither of them were super present in their kids' lives. I mean, they were both dead in a freezer for years, and the dads didn't know, so I think it's safe to say that they weren't super involved. Alexander, Stoney's father, had lived with Michelle for several years, but he and Michelle had separated after their first daughter was born. Clearly, they were still physical though, because, like, Stoni. He said he hadn't seen Stoni in about 2 years, but that she was, quote, fine the last time he saw her. He basically said that Michelle had told him, like, had forbid him from seeing Stoni, which is a cop-out in my opinion. That's my position. That'll always be my position when it comes to these things. And that anytime he asked where she was, Michelle said she was with a neighbor or with a family member. According to Alexander's sister, Alexander was trying to still be in his daughter's lives, even though the high school relationship had ended, but that Michelle made it very difficult, and that anytime he tried to be around, tried to talk to the kids, tried to engage at all, she made it very difficult for him to do so. Now listen, I don't doubt that that's true. Especially based on who Michelle is as a person, I totally believe that she made his life very, very difficult if he tried to see or talk to the girls, right? But here's the thing, nothing could stop me from seeing my son if I was in this situation where me and my husband were not together. Nothing. I hate this excuse. I hate this excuse that you hear usually from fathers for not seeing their kids. I hate the, oh, their baby mama's crazy, blah, blah, fucking blah. No, nothing. Nothing can keep me from my son. You've got a crazy ex. You want to see your kid? Go to court. Fight for your kid. It's such bullshit, and this is a hill that I will always die on. I had a really close friend who was dating this guy, and she told me that he had a kid he didn't see, and I was just like, how is this not such a fucking deal breaker? And she said the same thing. His baby's mom is crazy. Every time he talks to her, she makes it difficult for him. Okay, well, he is a deadbeat who doesn't fight to see his kid. And that is the greater evil to me. I feel very strongly about this, not just in this case, just in general. This is a hill that I aggressively die on. So I just want you to know that it's not this case specific. This is just something that I very strongly feel. And I hate that excuse because it's just bullshit. It's just bullshit. And Michelle's attorney actually echoed my sentiments. He was like, listen, I have a kid. Nothing would stop me from seeing my kid. If you wanted to, you could. And if you were worried and you couldn't get a hold of them, you could always call in a welfare check. You could do something. He said that this wasn't just a case of Michelle not letting these men see their kids, but these men not wanting to actively try to see their kids. Michelle claimed during the hearing that she had read Alexander's family's impact statements and that they were full of lies, that she didn't keep the girls from seeing their father, that they used to go over all the time, and that the only reason the visit stopped is because Alexander's father got caught being inappropriate with another underage female relative, and that on one occasion, the girls, her daughters, woke up to find him laying in their room. And that's why she stopped allowing the girls to go over and see their father, but that he was more than welcome to come over and see them. I'm sure the truth falls somewhere in the middle there. I do think that that little bit of information about the father's father is interesting. I don't know how much I trust what comes out of Michelle's mouth, but it is interesting considering what we're talking about here. Now, for fairness, I will say that I did read that Alexander was unemployed. That's why he owed so much in child support, and that he couldn't even afford bus fare to go and see his girls, and that it was too far to walk. But I just don't know. I don't know. He did also say that he was the one who reported her to CPS, I believe in 2005, because the girls had come to stay with him, and he had noticed whip marks on them, but that he never asked Michelle how they got there because he didn't want to argue. So it's just... everything about this case makes me unhappy, as I'm sure you can imagine. And I do still feel bad for him, don't get me wrong. He still lost his daughter, and I can't imagine how traumatizing that is, especially to know that you didn't try harder to see her, and you did try to call CPS before, and this still happened. And with him in particular, I did read that he didn't even know about his daughter dying until a reporter called him to question him about it, and that's how he learned about it. So that in itself is just devastating as well. Apparently the same reporter did try to call Stephen as well, the boy's father, and the number that he called, whoever answered the phone, hung up immediately when the reporter started talking, and when he called back, they didn't answer. So I don't really know what his situation is. I do know from what I read online, it doesn't appear that he's seen his son since 2012. And like Alexander, he owed Michelle a good amount in child support. I guess he had been making payments, but stopped making payments, and right around the time that all of this happened, he had recently been in and out of jail. That's basically the most I could figure out about him. Actually, there was one more thing about him. He was asked if he felt partially responsible for what happened to Stephen, and he did take ownership of that, and he did say yes, that he felt like he could have done more to protect him, which is something, I guess. And Michelle just, man, she did not like these guys. She yelled at them in court. She screamed at them in court saying, and I quote, "I did it. I never tried to say I didn't. I did it. But that does not negate the fact that they were never there for their children." At the end of this hearing, Alexander did say that he didn't believe his rights should be terminated because he was her father and he didn't do anything wrong. And Stephen declined to comment. But in the end, both Michelle and both fathers did end up losing their parental rights to the remaining children. Now, from what I can read online, it does seem like the two kids are okay. I hope they got the therapy they need. I think they did. What I read, it seems like they got the therapy they needed, because, man, they would really need it. I can't imagine what they went through to be living in that house, to know what your mom had done to your siblings, to have seen it happen, and to just have that freezer in that living room as a constant reminder, and then to have her beating you and just wondering when it was going to be your turn. When were you going to end up being put in the freezer as well? It's just, it's a nightmare. It is a nightmare. But the teenage daughter would be an adult now. She was set to graduate in 2017 with plans to go to college, and the young boy had been adopted. I didn't see by who. I know Mitchelle said that she wanted her Aunt Angela to be the one who adopted him, but I don't know if that's what happened. I just know that, you know, he was adopted and she wasn't because she was 17, and she ended up being in like an independent living home during her transitional period. The judge said of the children in the aftermath of their mother's upbringing, and I quote, "Both children overcame the majority of the setbacks they encountered in this case." So where Michelle's children have been working on improvement since she was arrested, Mitchelle has not been following suit. Not at all. Since being in jail, she's at least twice been charged with assaulting prison employees. In at least one of these instances, she was accused of throwing her own feces and urine at a corrections officer. I guess she like put it in a Pringles can, and when the officer came over to take her food tray, she was just like, and like threw it on them, which is just so gross, dude. Come on. Who does that? We live in a society. Well, she does. She doesn't. She lives in jail. But you know what I mean? Like, ugh. They also say that she spits at people, assaults people, and threatens to kill people. She kicked a cop in the stomach and in the arm. And in 2019, she had had 49 incidences against her since being in prison. So that would be 49 incidences from 2015 to 2019. And it was so bad that for a long time she was in segregation, but from what I read, she's now in general population. In the general population. Gen Pop. Pop. So this woman is evil, right? She said herself in her interrogation that she is evil. What she did is evil, but there seem to be two different versions of this woman, both in how other people see her and how she perceives herself. First, she says she loves her kids. During her interrogation, she even asked the officers if they could please, like the girl who was interrogating her, if she could get to her kids and to please like give them a hug and tell them that she loved them, and not to tell them that she was crying because she didn't want them to worry about her. She also talked about loving her kids on her Facebook page. Michelle's Facebook page said, and I quote, "Loyal to my babies." And she had shared a post that said, quote, "There is no greater blessing than being called a mom." So there's that version of her, which is like a good mother who like loves her kids and talks about them and like puts their work up on the wall at home and protects them. There's that version of her to some people and to her. A version people trusted enough to let her babysit their kids. But then in the same breath, or not the same breath, but then from the same woman, she says that Stephen and Stoni are demons, and that yes, she killed them, and yet that yes, she would do it again if she had the chance. And it doesn't seem like her opinion on that has even changed. After being arrested, she did a jailhouse interview with Crime Watch Daily, and she said that she stands by what she initially said. She had not like swayed or felt remorse with time to really sit and think about what she did. And she said, and I quote, "At first I cried, but I would kill them again. There were no other options." Now, why did Mitchelle do this? This is really the question, right? There's some back and forth on whether or not it's true that Stephen and Stoni were abusing their brother. I know that there was a jailhouse informant that came out, somebody who was in jail with Mitchelle, who said that Mitchelle said she made the whole thing up, that she lied about the abuse to get sympathy for what she had done, that it was just chronic abuse that had gone overboard, and then she lied to, you know, get off. But then there was a reporter who was in the court, named Vicky Thomas, I believe, who said that during this hearing there was a recording played from the young boy, and in this recording he did discuss abuse at the hands of his siblings. And this reporter Vicky said specifically, and I quote, "He said his sister Stoni raped him and also made allegations of inappropriate touching by his brother Stephen." And after this reporting was played in court, Mitchelle like looked over at the fathers who were sitting together and just like yelled, like, "See, look what your daughter did to my son." So it does seem like it's possible that the little boy was being abused by his siblings, but I didn't find clarification on exactly how, like the specifics. So I can't really tell you that today. Now, I will say this. Is it possible that Stoni and Stephen were abusing their brother? Yes, of course it's possible. But I will say that if, that's a big if they were abusing their brother, there's a good chance, it's almost a certainty that somebody was doing this to them as well, because they were kids, right? Stoni's 13, Stephen's even younger. So if Stephen and Stoni were doing this to their brother, they got this from somewhere. You know what I mean? Like, they're not just going to wake up one day and do this. Whether it be somebody doing it to Stoni and then her doing it to Steven and it trickling down from there, I don't know. But this isn't the type of thing that would just pop into a child's head without some sort of reference point. It's just such a fucked up situation all around. Because if they were abusing their brother, they needed help. They needed help. They needed therapy. They needed something. But they did not need or deserve to be beaten and starved and burned and suffocated by their mother. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't have any sympathy for people who sexually abuse or hurt children. But these two were also children. Now, a reason that if this is true, if this did happen, a reason that this could have particularly enraged Mitchelle is because she has said that she was sexually abused as a child, and that it enraged her in such a way because she knew how her young son had felt because she had been in that position and had felt that way before. She said that as a kid she had told her mother about the abuse and that her mom had just been like, well, what do you want me to do about it? It's already done. It's already happened. And that her mother stayed friends with this person. This person was a woman, and it was a woman who had abused her and her brother. And that her mother stayed friends with her, so she'd have to see her all the time, still at their house, still socializing, still have to be around this person. And that it made her feel like stupid for even telling her mother and ashamed. And that to this day, she doesn't talk to her mother and father. She did say she can't use this as an excuse because she is an adult and she made her choices, but she was using it more of a way to explain, not excuse her behavior because of what happened to her, she has a serious issue with people abusing kids. And Mitchelle says that she talked to her kids about this, that she talked to them about what happened to her, who did it, and how it made her feel. And she told them to tell her if anyone was ever to do anything like that to them. She said that she told them that rape is the worst thing you can do to a person, and that that's why she was so rageful, because she had explained so explicitly why this was so bad. So that means to her that Stoni and Steven knew exactly how bad what they were doing was. And I just don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know what I think about this case. I mean, I know what I think about certain things, but what I don't know is what really happened here, what really happened in that house. I don't know if Stoni and Steven really abused their brother. I don't know if they were abused themselves. I don't know if they just admitted this because their mother was literally torturing them. Like, it's so hard to really know the truth. One thing I do know, one thing I do really truly believe is that deep down inside, something that I think is the truth is that Mitchelle is an evil woman. She's a monster. She is a horrible person who abused her kids, including the child that she was trying to save from Steven and Stoni for years. She terrorized and tortured all of those children and then murdered 2 of them and then kept them in a public place in the home so that the other kids would be in continued fear for a prolonged period of time, for years. And they had no one in their corner, no one that they could run to, no one that they could turn to, no one to protect them from the one person whose fucking job it was to keep them safe. Their terrorizer, their mother. Anyways, now that I have given you all the information on this case, I want you to revisit the question of the day, and that is this. Do you believe what Mitchelle says? Do you believe that Mitchelle's son was being abused by his 2 older siblings? Or do you believe that this is something that Mitchelle made up to justify her prolonged, chronic abuse that just went too far? But anyways, guys, that completes this video. I hope you found it interesting and informative, and I hope it gave you all the information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, thank you for remembering Steven and Stoni with me today. What happened to those kids is atrocious. It's unthinkable. I do not know how Mitchelle sleeps at night. I do not know how you can hurt your kids. I don't think I'll ever understand how a person can hurt their children. When I look at my son, literally all I want to do is give him 1 million kisses all over his face. All I want is to do everything in my power to make him as happy as possible and to not make it so he has to heal from any damage I inflict on him, even mentally. You know what I mean? I hate this woman. I hate this woman. And that's really all I have to say. Anyways, guys, please let me know down below of any cases you'd like to see me cover in the future. As this one illustrates, if you leave me the suggestion, I will try to get to it. I know you're filled with good ideas and good taste. Otherwise, you would not be here. And I love looking at the cases that you guys suggest because Sometimes he suggests some ones that really need more coverage, like this one, even if it is very difficult. I'm going to need to watch a lot of Hannah Louise Poston on beauty YouTube to try to like empty my brain of all of this horrible shit, because this case is just so awful, but it does deserve to be told, and Stoni and Stephen do deserve to be remembered. It's hard to even like move on with like the outro because I'm just so frustrated, but if you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell. I put out a new video every week and I'd love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically, you. If you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is linked down below, along with a link to my merch store where you can get this shirt if you want. This is the original Brat Pack before we got the little baby up in this mix. So that link will be down there as well. And with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday, and I hope to see you in my next video.